According to a new survey, the majority of the Russian population wants peace within the next year, even if it forces Russia to make a compromise to give in some regards. This is happening while their armed forces are once again being caught using chemical weapons and thus committing a war crime. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened over the past few days in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian drones have struck the distilleries in Yevernov and in Lushlovsky. There's a video here showing fire on the horizon that is with the distillery. Now, of course, we could joke and say this is the way the Ukrainians now want to strike the Russians by taking away their liquor. But it's here. It also says that a power plant and a rubber factory, which were next to the distillery, apparently were also hit. And we have we have other claims that Russia is using this alcohol for fuel, for military fuel, and for explosives. Then we have Rusic, the right-wing extremists fighting for Russia, showing how they use chemical weapons. This is a grenade that is loaded with chloropicrin. As you can see here, they even say themselves that they are annoying the Ukrainians, and this is a derogatory term being used in this, with grenades and with gas. Chloropicrin, or chloropicrin, I think is then the English pronunciation, is a lung agent that was used in World War II as a chemical weapon. Germany used it under the name Grünkreuz 1, so Green Cross 1, and according to what I've read, even gas masks only provide a limited effectiveness against it. It's obviously banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. Russia has signed and ratified it, and it's still being used to disinfect soil and to disinfect seeds. That's the usage that is currently being done, and here the Russians have once again published a video using it against the Ukrainians. We'll switch over to the developments along the front line. And here we have a Ukrainian attack going into the Russian flank close to Seleny Slyach, or basically in Seleny Slyach, which is here. There, the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade was active, which was apparently redeployed to Kursk, and they used a Bradley and an Abrams to attack Russian positions. At this point, the actual fighting happened here. So we see that the Ukrainians likely pushed up here, as we had the Russians already operating in this region, as I showed you in past situation reports. This map is probably better in the Kursk region, showing where the Russians have operated lately. And as you can see, as I showed you, I think in the last situation report, the Russians have almost reached Malaya Lochnia from the west. This is signed here. This is shown here on the map as a contested area, as the Russians were defeated in this regard. But we see the Ukrainians now attacking upwards here, obviously still doing counterattacks in this region. The Russians also attacked east of Kremanwe, down here, and they have reached positions at this point, and at this point pushing the Ukrainians in these directions away from their latest positions. This is geolocated, as you can see, east of Kremanwe, around these forested areas here, as I've pointed out on the map. That was it with the developments along the front line in Kursk. We switch over to Kharkiv. Fighting is continuing there, no change on the ground, so we don't waste time and switch over right to the eastern front. Here we have a Russian advance west of Kislivka. The Russians have roughly reached this point here, so this area is likely now under Russian influence. At this point, we have it geolocated as well, that the Russians are here at this position. I've shown you in past situation reports that they also had been already down here, so at the very least, this here should be under Russian influence. Further south, the deep state map has now done an update, but it just shows what I've shown you in the last situation report, the connection between the north and the south in the bridgehead on the Oskil detail is definitely cut at this point. And as we can see, it's likely that the Ukrainians can no longer use the road and the bridge here or the dam here at Senkove. This is probably already cut by the Russians as well. Further south, I have no change along the front line until the Seversky Donetsk. The south of the river, there is fighting ongoing in the direction of Siversk, but no proven change in territory. Same at Chasiv Yar area. Here also nothing has changed to what I can see. And Toretsk and New York, the same here. I do not see any fresh change in territory over the last 2 days. West of it, in the Pokrovsk area, we have a number of activities. First, we have a Ukrainian counterattack west of Krasny Yar. It is advancing. Let me quickly check. Now it moved up to here. This should be more or less at this position here. But from the video, it failed. So the Ukrainians attacked in this direction, probably somewhere along this route, but the attack failed there. So where the current line of control is, I cannot fully say. The Russians have advanced in Selydove, and there the developments are actually fast. It's developing fast. It almost feels like the Ukrainians are doing a withdrawal regarding the size of the gained territory by the Russians. We have the Russians raising a flag in the high rises here south of the river. So the Russians have raised a flag at this point here, which means they either have come from the south. We had them at the latest point roughly here. No, I think a little further south. So either they have advanced up here or they've come from the east. The second option is probably more likely, as we had them before geolocated at this point. But we have the Russians basically here and we have them here. So wherever they come from is unclear, but it seems likely that this area is probably no longer held by the Ukrainians at this point. As said, completely we can't say from which direction they came. But they were solid enough, they had embedded themselves solid enough here to have the opportunity to raise a flag, which means that the Ukrainians couldn't have had a line of sight to this. So the actual line of control, the actual front positions of the Ukrainians are further back than this, which means that probably a third of Selydove, maybe 20-25%, but probably not less, is already in Russian hands as of now. The Russians have also advanced west of Tsukuryne. Basically, the whole area here has fallen to the Russians. We have a geolocation here that they are now down here. This is Tsukuryne. They're west of it here at this point. But the whole area here has now been attributed to the Russians, so they have solidified the control over several square kilometers northwest of Tsukuryne. The Ukrainians are likely currently withdrawing from Rink. There's reports in this regards, mostly from the Russians, but we've seen that they have advanced somewhat in Rink, and Ismailivka has also fallen. Here in the center of Ismailivka and the northern positions, the Russians already had presence. There's a video of the Russians raising their flag there and even grouping up, showing that there can't be any Ukrainian presence anywhere close to this right now. It seems increasingly that with the Russians having reached Ostrivske and with the Russians having reached Zoriane, that the Ukrainians are doing a general retreat in this whole area. Obviously, I can't be for sure. We see them losing a lot of positions lately, which are probably to some withdrawal. And as you can see, they have lost the connection to the south. The Russians are advancing in Kurakhove, and here they have bypassed Surokyne, which means there is basically a pocket like this. So it's quite possible that we might see the Russians taking over this whole area when the Ukrainians consolidate their positions further to the west, roughly at this line here. This is at least what I would not be surprised. We'll have to see. Obviously, I can't tell you what the Ukrainian decisions are, but from what we see here, either the front line is under such pressure that the Ukrainians can't hold their frontline positions anymore, even just for 1 or 2 days, or we are seeing a bigger withdrawal here. And while the Ukrainians are under immense pressure in the Pokrovsk region, it seems somewhat unlikely that, especially here, they are so weak. It seems more likely that this is a withdrawal. So we should see the Russians taking over a couple of these towns fairly soon, while the Ukrainians pull back further to the west. And a look on the map indicates that this would probably make a lot of sense for the Ukrainians to pull back here. Further south, the Russians have advanced further in the Duchy of Kurahove. We had them lately, I think, in here in the last situation report. So by now they have advanced further until here. This should be probably correct here on the map. So we see them advancing further and further. They gained probably over a kilometer in this region over the past few days, and they are getting closer and closer to the built-up areas of Kurahove. But this is already apart from what I've seen. These are the Dachas, so they are technically already inside, advancing inside of Kurahove. South of it, the Russians have advanced north of Konstantinivka. Now, this area has not seen too much activity anymore as the Russians were advancing south of the river, but we now have them north of it as well. This is, yeah, I made a screenshot here because this I can't show you. This is the inside and it shows some gruesome pictures, so that's why I could probably not access that posting over the net itself. And it has Russian positions here directly north of Konstantinivka, more or less along this line here. So we can expect that the Russian control has probably moved to this line as of now. Further west, the Russians have also advanced north of the river again into Antonivka. This is also geolocated, and as you can see, they've already entered the town and gained the first houses, so they are creating pressure on Antonivka as well. This is happening while the Russians are in Katerinivka and to its south as well, while this area, as you can see, is already under their influence. Here, the deep state map seems to be correct. I do not have a confirmation to which degree they have consolidated their control here and taken permanent positions. But here again, they are getting pushed back. Further south, the Ukrainians have lost more territory northwest of Vuhledar. This is geolocated as well. The Russian positions are now 1.7 kilometers close to Boyavlenka this year. And this is the first bigger town after the fall of Vudiane and Vuhledar, and the Russians are no longer too far away from it and will probably reach it fairly soon. That was it with territorial changes. I have nothing in the Velika Novosilka, Orikhiv region or on the Dnipro. Fighting is reported from all these regions, but I do not see that anything there has changed. But the Ukrainians are now trying their best with psychological warfare. Here we can see a propaganda video. It's sped up, but it's a video created by the Ukrainians in Korean, meant at the Korean soldiers, showing that they have heated rooms and food, in plenty of food, basically, that they will be treated well if they are surrendering. This is an attempt by the Ukrainians to make North Koreans surrender, as they are likely arriving on the front line fairly soon. But we'll talk about this now in the troop generation part. Moscow has increased its bonus for signing to 2.3 million. Last signing bonus was 1.9 million. This is happening. This is continuing what I've talked about in the past, what we had in the past, that the Russians are having personnel trouble. Of course, they could do a mobilization, but the internal costs, the domestic costs are too high for this. So Russia tries to keep it up with hiring mercenaries and with recruiting volunteers, but the barrel is getting more or less empty. So they have to increase the fees, the signature bonus, to sign a contract, and Moscow has now reached over 2 million with a point of 2.3 million. It keeps going up, showing the trouble the Russians have in finding enough volunteers to still sign up. Then we have that was the wrong one. Then we have the report from Newsweek here that North Korean pilots have arrived in Russia. There is speculation what they could do. North Koreans have pilots trained in Sukhoi 25 and in MiG-29. We have not seen, I can't remember ever having seen MiG-29 being used against the Ukrainians, as Russia still has MiG-29, and Sukhoi 25 could, theoretically, those pilots could fly the Sukhoi 25 against Ukraine, but the Russian Sukhoi 25 should be much more modern. So the pilots, it's unlikely that it works well to just put the pilot in the pilot seat and let them fly. So while there's some speculation whether the North Koreans might fly planes for the Russians, as the Russians supposedly have a shortage of pilots, the losses in Sukhoi 25 haven't been that massive either, that Russia should have such a shortage that it's necessary. And the MiG-29 the North Koreans are flying are so ancient that, again, they should have trouble flying the modernized versions that the Russians have without being trained on them specifically. So while it's theoretically possible that the North Koreans might get ready to fly Russian planes against Ukraine, it seems more likely to me that they are right now in Russia to be trained on planes that North Korea will receive in return for its aid. We talked about it a couple of times here in the past, that North Korea has dire need in several regards. They need food, they need fuel, and this is easy to deliver. But what they need in military-wise is air defense, and especially the Air Force, which is completely ancient and flies vastly outclassed planes, especially in regards to the south. And there it was likely that North Korea will ask for new planes, probably Sukhoi 35, maybe Sukhoi 30 SM, but it's likely that North Korea will receive some, and we're probably talking about pilots being trained on those here in this regard. Then we have reports that Russia will start its tests with the acoustic system to find drones. We talked about it in the past. The Ukrainians have developed a system where they simply put up cell phones. I think they actually use cell phones or microphones that are connected to the cell phone network. And those microphones collect noise around them. And as the drones have a specific signature, they can identify when a drone flies by, and then it's a simple measure of triangulation. You take all the volume of the noise of the drone and in which direction it flies, you compare it with other signatures, with other recordings, and then you can triangulate fairly accurately where the drone is right now, and thus even find it if it bypasses, even if the radar, or even if the radar can't see it. As this was published roughly 9 months ago, it's no surprise that the Russians do not try to invent something themselves, but they simply take a really good idea that the Ukrainians have had and start to implement it itself, especially as it's probably fairly affordable as well. And as it says here, it's going to help the Russians identify where the drones fly, especially if they fly in valleys, for instance, to avoid a radar. And it will work with the cell phone network as well, and should thus, as soon as it's implemented, reduce the effectiveness of the Ukrainian drone attacks. Then we have reports from South Korea. The claim is that South Korea thinks about sending troops to Ukraine, but while that was blown out of proportions by some, that South Korea might now enter the war on Ukraine's side to fight North Koreans at the same time, the explanation is we are likely talking about analysts, maybe some intelligence personnel. They want to find out what the North Koreans are doing. If North Koreans are being arrested, being caught as prisoners of war, they will likely interrogate them. But that South Korea will enter the fight with its own troops is extremely unlikely, not only because Russia has a higher potential to escalate, but also at the same time we're talking about a democracy with conscription that has horrible demographics. The likelihood of South Korea sending soldiers to die in Ukraine is extremely is close to non-existence. So this should be put into perspective. If South Korea sends somebody, then it's a small group of specialists that do intelligence work, but who will definitely not be on the front line fighting. That seems completely inconceivable at this very moment. Ukraine is developing new weapons, though. We have the Ram-2. This is new Ukrainian loitering munitions. As you can see, it has optical sensors in the front, and it's meant to fly around the front line and hit targets at will. Probably some kind of Lancet copy, or inspired by the Lancet. Again, as said, not just the Russians copy from the other side, the Ukrainians obviously do it just the same. And as the Lancet has proven its worth, the Ukrainians already said they are going to try develop something that is similar to this. And here we see the first types of it when they are introduced. Then we have a survey in Russia. There was a new survey asking the Russians how they think about the war. 49% are in favor of a peace, even if the goals of the war have not been reached. This is higher than ever before. 49% prefers peace to a new wave of mobilization, so roughly half of the population rather wants peace than a mobilization, and this is obviously something that the Kremlin will take into account when it thinks about recruiting soldiers. 29%, so roughly 1/3, would rather have an additional mobilization than peace. And 63% said that they want peace in the coming year, even if it requires them to give in some regards. This is also a new record, and only 32% are willing to join the war if they are asked. This is down from 42%, a new record as well. And instead of 21% so far, now 30% say they are explicitly against joining the war. Obviously, some in between probably say, I don't know, and this is not them actually being asked to sign up. It's just them being asked whether they would generally be willing. But we see that the willingness of the Russians to continue fighting this war goes down consistently, even though the majority still supports Putin. This does not mean that Russia is about to break, but it shows that in a war of attrition, Ukraine still has a chance, because Ukraine doesn't need to kill every Russian man that could be a soldier. It just needs to force the Russians to reach a point where their men don't want to fight anymore and refuse to go fight. And then it has won the war of attrition. Obviously, this would come with extremely high costs for the Ukrainians themselves, though. But as we're talking about high costs, the European Union has agreed on a 35 billion euro credit for the Ukrainians, and it's going to be paid and it's going to be secured with the income from the future income from frozen Russian assets. Then we have reports that the US will provide Ukraine with another 800 million US dollar to boost its domestic long-range capabilities. As Zelensky says, we're talking about drones though. So this is not them paying for some ballistic missiles or delivering some. According to the article, it's about drones, but here now the United States apparently are willing to help the Ukrainians develop their better systems. Then we have a report from France. The 3rd Mechanized Battalion of the Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Brigade is training currently in France, and we see them here on a AMX-10RC. This is a French reconnaissance vehicle that was already delivered to Ukraine. The French are currently decommissioning them, and they have already given some to Ukraine, and this will be a brigade that's not just trained by the French, but that will also be equipped by the French, and apparently some part of their equipment will be the AMX-10RC. And then we have reports from Great Britain. Today, the latest graduation of Ukrainian pilots from the RAF elementary flying training took place. This shows that the UK apparently trains fresh men. So we are no longer talking about military pilots that are being sent there that have no prior training. At least if we're talking about an elementary flying training, then I would understand this as we are talking about people who do not have flying experience before, or at best maybe civilian flying experience, that are currently being trained and prepared to fly future F-16. Also a good news for Ukraine, as only this will guarantee Ukraine a consistent resupply with pilots, as obviously they will face a certain attrition during the war, as we all know. But that was already it for today. If you like today's situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment in the comment section. What do you think about the current developments, be it the South Korean position in this war, or the US aid for the development of long-range weapons? If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. And tomorrow we're gonna have a video here that is already accessible to the members and on Patreon about the coming Israeli strike against Iran. So if you don't want to miss it out, better subscribe to the channel. If this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.